Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network. Neither Chris Evers, Philip Mantle, Inside Outer Limits radio show, Flying Disc Press or Outer Limits magazine endorse any of the products you may have heard advertised at the beginning, the end, or inserted into the middle of this show. The only products we do endorse are those that are strictly affiliated to Outer Limits magazine, or Flying Disc Press. We now hope you enjoy the show, thank you. Outer Limits magazine presents A Fourth Encounter. A Fourth Encounter. On the 7th and 8th of May, 2022. Featuring the following speakers: Peter Robbins, Malcolm Robinson, Paul Sinclair, Jennifer Stein, Philip Kinsella, Ronald Kinsella, Paul Askoff, Mike Koffel, Sasha Christie, Steve Midgley, Colin Saunders, and your host from Outer Limits magazine, Chris Evers. Featuring previously advertised speakers. Please note, we shall endeavor to include all advertised speakers at this event. But, if government guidelines prohibit their travel and attendance, we shall run the event with a full list of only UK-based speakers. Also note that you may be required to prove your vaccination status to enter the building and attend. We will follow government guidelines. Therefore, it is recommended to check the OLM website on a regular basis, where tickets can also be purchased. We look forward to seeing you at our A Fourth Encounter event.
Once more, and welcome to yet another edition of the Inside Outer Limits radio show with myself, Chris Evers, the man from Outer Limits magazine, and my co-host, who is of UFO royalty, definitely royal blood, the one and only Prince Philip Mantle. Hello, Phil.
Good evening, Chris. Nice to talk to you, mate.
You as well. You getting fed up of that yet?
No. I don't take any notice anyway.
Best way to be, mate, really, isn't it? I'm just glad you can take a joke on the chin, Phil, to be quite honest with you.
Well, when you've been involved in this subject that long, Chris, you've got to do. You have to remember, I used to work in a factory,
Yes.
and I've heard every little green man joke on earth. I really have.
You should write a book about them as well then, Phil.
Well, there were great guys I worked with in the factory, and I do miss it. I had to leave unexpectedly when I took ill, but you could literally, I could write you a soap opera about it, Chris. Some of the things they used to get up to, because not only did I work in the factory, I was also the trade union shop steward. So I had to represent a lot of these gentlemen that I worked with for crimes and misdemeanors of one sort or another. I always said, look, I'm not religious, but if I was, I'd never go to heaven after all the lies I've told for you lot. You know what I mean?
Oh dear. Now, talking about writing books, who have we got today?
Well, we have a gentleman from across the Atlantic. He really doesn't need much introduction, and it's Don Schmitt. Don, I've met on a number of occasions. He is, I think, a multiple best-selling author, best known for his research into the UFO crash at Roswell in 1947. Well, that's not the only thing he's done, but that's the main focus of his research down the years. And so we'll welcome our friend from across the Atlantic, Don Schmitt. Good evening, Don.
Well, good evening. I'm so happy to be with both of you, Philip and Chris.
Hiya, Don. Welcome to the show. How you doing? How you keeping?
I'm wonderful. Actually, in the face of everything, we move forward. We put last year behind us in many respects. We wish good health and Godspeed to everyone listening tonight, and look forward to seeing everybody, and hopefully sooner than later.
Absolutely, yeah. We're hoping to do that as well with our conference next year here in the UK, in Hull, which is the 7th and 8th of May. And we've got a gentleman coming over who you may know of, you may have heard of him, by the name of Peter Robbins, and also another young lady by the name of Jennifer Stan.
Yes, dear friends, both of them. So
excellent. Well, I did mention to Peter quite recently that I was speaking to you, and he just said send him my love, basically. So there you go, all done and dusted.
Yeah, I mentioned your name to him as well, Don, and he said you couldn't get any better.
Oh, there you go.
And I've been a bit remiss in getting back to Peter. He has his own radio show now out of New York, and I did a part. We did it one of his first shows, and we ran out of time. We covered so much ground that he said, "Please, you got to come back," and I need to reschedule with him for sometime this fall. So thank you for reminding me about that.
That's not a problem. And his show, folks, if you haven't heard of it yet, is Meanwhile Here on Earth. So get searching out there for it. I think it's on KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. So have a search for it, folks, and I think you can find it on YouTube as well.
Chris, was that your telephone voice you put on then?
Yes, mate. That was my telephone.
Meanwhile,
that was my telephone voice, mate. That was my Dan Sarf voice, mate. That one.
See, over here, we would call it the radio voice. It's in that DJ mode where listening to the top 40 hits of yesterday.
My mum used to do that, when somebody knocked on the door at the house, she'd go to the door and their accent would change for the East Yorkshire accent here in Hull, Hull, but we pronounce it with no H at the beginning, so it's Hull. And my mum would put a posh voice on when she went to the door or she answered the telephone, so it must be a habit that she's passed on.
So, Don,
right?
obviously you're world known for your UFO research, especially into Roswell. But one of the things we always ask our guests is, how did you get involved in UFO research in the first place? How did it all start for you?
Well, I can honestly say out of the John F. Kennedy, the JFK assassination. I was a young boy at the time in '63, and I was so captivated by the aftermath and all the talk of the Warren Commission and then the Warren Report, and then all the accusations of it being a whitewash and a cover-up. And I was Christmas shopping with my folks, and my parents could tell you that at the age of 6 already, I had a voracious appetite for reading. Christmas time, what do you want? I would list all these book titles. so from elementary school on, I couldn't get enough books. And I came across this book entitled Flying Saucers Serious Business by Frank Edwards. And I was especially, curious about the book entitled Who's Driving? The idea that these weren't just unmanned probes or unmanned craft, that they were actually piloted, and no less by non-humans. So throughout high school and then thereafter in college, and then becoming a field investigator with the Area Phenomena Research Organization, and some of my case reports just happened to come across the desk of no other than Dr. Jalen Hynek. Well, he was impressed enough that he invited me to his home in Evanston. This would have been in 1978. And within a few visits, I was asked to work with him, become a special investigator with him. There were a handful of us at that time. And people remember that he had his invisible college and people that because of their university affiliations, that type of thing. But he had his boys, and that's what he called us, his boys. And as a result, then after his passing, I became director of the special investigations of his Center for UFO Studies. I'm on his board of directors. And I can't emphasize enough, I was a skeptic on Roswell. When Kevin Randall and I made that first journey to New Mexico in the beginning of 1989, we were so confident we would wrap this up in a single weekend. And how wrong we were, because we couldn't get back fast enough. We were back within 2 months. And then again and again, and here it is over 30 years later. And granted, the Undertaker has won the race as witnesses go. But just yesterday, talking with my partner Tom Carey again, we were discussing a half a dozen new family leads, possible deathbed testimonies, which are admissible in a court of law, both here and in the UK. And so we haven't lost that fire. We haven't lost that anticipation of still, wrapping this up at some point, and then getting on with something, much less serious, like cancer research or something simpler.
God, dear me.
I remember I think one of the first times I saw you on TV, Don, you were actually announced, or you announced yourself. I can't remember which way it was, but then part of the Center for UFO Studies. And I'm not sure you were discussing Roswell at all. I don't think that came into the conversation. But I don't know what TV show it was. I can't remember. But I remember you being on it. And
well, in fact, I was even on Oprah Winfrey, and it was before Roswell. So and I would brief the late Paul Harvey at ABC News after Dr. Hynek passed away. So it was wonderful working with the man, with the foremost authority on the subject, and not only as a mentor, as a teacher, but as a dear friend. And I don't think there's a day that goes by, Philip and Chris, that I don't think of Alan Hynek. And what would he do? What would he think? How would he approach this? And just a tremendous influence.
Well, I mean, I never managed to meet Dr. Hynek. I like many people, I hold him in extremely high regard. I actually missed him. He was here in 1979 in the UK at a conference, and I was going to attend the conference. I literally just put my foot in the UFO pond at that time, and I decided not to go. And of course, I thought I'll see him again, but I never got the chance again. When it comes to Roswell, Don, what was Dr. Hynek's opinion? Bearing in mind he passed away before you began your research.
Right.
Did it ever come up in the conversation at all?
Not personally, but we discovered, we knew beforehand, especially with the late Len Stringfield, who, with his affiliation with NICAP and then with MUFON, that he started to collect crash retrieval cases. And then when he had that presentation at the MUFON conference in Dayton, Ohio, of all places, where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is located, and he presented that very paper. Well, Hynek was sitting in the audience because Hynek already had been hearing rumors, and as he would later confess to his personal secretary, Jenny Zeidman, that the Air Force had told him that they had one in their possession without going into detail. And then Jenny, well, where did you hear this? And Alan passed a note back to her at a dinner at an award celebration the Air Force had. So Hynek not only saw that this would, be the climax, the epitome of all of his research, that he could demonstrate that we had one in our possession. In fact, the last time that we even had dinner together, and as an astronomer, he had a very difficult time wrestling with the vast distances from point A to B. Mm-hmm. And he just could not comprehend that we were dealing with something physical, but yet he had to concede that as he was pounding his fist on the dinner table to me, and he was going, Don, it's smacking more and more of nuts and bolts. In other words, you go across the street and kick the tires. And so that's where he became all the more intrigued with crash retrieval, because he could then point his finger not up at the sky, but the government, and say, you're holding back. I was the consultant on your Air Force Project Blue Book for almost 20 years, and I believe that I am owed some answers. And when he passed, we discovered in his private files that after he had left the Evanston, Chicago area, and he went to Scottsdale, Arizona, and he was willed an abandoned observatory in the Truth or Consequences area of western New Mexico. And whenever they would go and do some, as far as refurbishing and maintenance and trying to bring it back into working order, he was slipping over into Lincoln County, central New Mexico. And he was interviewing Roswell ranchers from 1947. And his handwritten notes talking to the Proctors and the Stricklands and the Saltemeyers, who were the very people involved back at the time. And at the top, this needs to be investigated, that type of thing. So the irony that we've come full circle, that Alan Hynek, even posthumously, led us to Roswell. And we didn't even realize he was doing it till after he was gone.
Mm. So how obviously you've done a lot of investigation. How did you personally get involved with the Roswell case? I know it was you and Kevin Randall. How did it all come about?
Well, it was, as Director of Special Investigations, I wanted to go after one of the biggies. I wanted to go after, at the time even, the very idea that how could you keep something of that magnitude a secret after all that time? It's just too big. In fact, I had even done a paper in 1985, 5 years after the Moore Berlitz book, Roswell Incident, was even published. And I had never read the book. I just saw that I invited Kevin. Kevin was not part of QPOS at that time. Kevin and I had participated in a debate at a science fiction conference of all place against Frederick Pohl, and he used to be a writer with the Twilight Zone TV series, the remake after Rod Serling had passed away, and his name escapes me for the moment. But anyway, I brought up Roswell, and I was surprised that Kevin too was as skeptical. And it's like, well, that would be a great foundation for going down. Two skeptics, and let's just go wherever the evidence leads us. And no one can fault us with going in with a preconceived theory as to what we believe this was. We fully allow the evidence, the eyewitness testimony, the accumulation of anecdotal evidence to point us in one direction or another. And here we are 30 years later. And when I'm asked, Don, do you believe that something crashed at Roswell? I answer, no, I don't believe. But I'm 99% convinced that it was a craft of unknown origin.
Yeah, Kevin told us, the story about the science fiction, and he kind of got into it by accident, really.
Yes.
It certainly wasn't anything that was on his radar.
No, not at all. And it wasn't on mine until I was at a board meeting at QFOS, and I made the proposal, and it was suggested, well, who from the center would you like to partner with? And I went, I'd like to get someone from outside. and it was an excellent choice.
So everybody knows the Roswell crash. We don't have to go into it, and explain what it is. You've interviewed everybody involved. So is there one stuff that sticks out in as far as you're concerned, that things, if you don't believe anybody else, if you think others are unreliable or their memory's fading, this is the person you should listen to. This is why I met an interview. Is one such person?
Well, and what happened, it would turn out to be a witness that we just missed by 3 years, and that would be the late Major Jesse Marcel, Sr., the head intelligence officer. And to this day, I can't believe the original investigators, and quite frankly, William Moore, and even our good friend of Saturday, they never bothered to take him essentially back to the scene of crime. Just imagine he's taken and decide, this is what I saw here, this is what I saw there, this is where I saw this, and so on. You wouldn't back to the battlefield, so to speak, to the hard witness, the very location, exactly what he says. Interviews are only words on tape or on paper. You need to take someone to where you relive the experience through document, and then it allows you to determine how much is actual recall, they are that kind of thing. They don't anything. We always need a point to a very location of where the witness is. And that's my big bet that we would recommend above all else his son, Marcel Jr., who happened, at the house that very early morning when his father returning back to the base, his car filled with the actual debris. And he made a point, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. He woke his wife by, and Jesse Jr. took them to the kitchen. And you know the story, where he had some of the debris all scattered across the floor. So Jesse Jr. was allowed to handle it firsthand. And in fact, neither his dad nor Jesse Jr. ever doubted, ever recanted, to both of their passings, that they stood firm, that nobody was going to talk them into believing what they held in their very hands was any less than what they saw it to be. After the Air Force here in the States came out with their Project Mogul report, explanation number 3, and it was then Captain James McAndrew who made it a point, and Jesse told us all about this, that McAndrew called him repeatedly, in fact, 6 separate times, trying to convince him that, Jesse, what you saw in your kitchen back in 1947 was nothing but masking tape with flowers painted on it and some foil and some string, nothing more. And Jesse, nope, you and no one else is going to change my mind. You weren't there. I know what I held in my very hands. And then Jess would describe how McAndrew, when he became a major, he called Jesse again, and he pressed him. What's it going to take? His voice elevated tone. What's it take you to finally believe that's all you saw were the remnants of a balloon? And Jesse reminded him, he called him, listen, Sonny, I outrank you. And McAndrew came back to him, well, Colonel, I guess then we'll never know what you actually saw back in 1947. So he conceded. This is something that, we're the only ones that ever publicized the fact that the very author of the Project Mogul report, Major James McAndrew, he backed down to Jesse Jr. and stated, right, we'll never know what you actually, we know. Jesse knew. But the point is, McAndrew, as a lowly major, certainly never had clearance, never had access. But Marcel won the debate. He won the argument as to what he knew to be the truth.
Yeah, I mean, when Jesse was here, I played devil's.
Yes.
I played devil's.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I played devil's advocate with him, Don. I'll do the same with yourself. But let's assume, for sake of argument, that the Air Force was correct, that this was a balloon of some description, irrespective of whether it was Mogul or whatever.
Right.
Then Major Marcel, the base intelligence officer, made an enormous mess because he's the base intelligence officer. He should know what's what. So surely, if that was the case, Don, would Marcel Sr. not have been reprimanded in some respect, if not openly, but then perhaps, in a different way, sent to whatever the American equivalent of Siberia is,
Exactly.
He's made a complete mess of things.
Absolutely.
Look at this, we're a laughing stock. We can't openly, criticize him. We'll just make him look a bit foolish, and then we'll ship him out of here and get him. What happened?
Keeping in mind, Philip, that he was the #1 intelligence officer in the United States military at that time. We're talking about the 509th Bomb Wing. They were a composite squadron. They were in charge of the atomic bomb, where they selected the best officers, the best pilots, crew, doctors, nurses. If you swept a broom back on that base in Roswell in 1947, it was because you were the best sweeper in the entire U.S. military.
So why wasn't he reprimanded then, Don, if he'd made such a mess?
That's correct. And he wasn't the one who would have authorized the press release. He would not have been in that position. It was the base commander, Colonel William Blanchard, who would have had the sole authority of putting out that press release on Tuesday, July 8th, that they had actually captured a flying saucer. And then keeping in mind that Blanchard went on to become a 4-star general by the age of 50. That's unheard of in the U.S. military. So much for anyone being reprimanded.
Exactly.
No, they were promoted because they were able to contain this, keep it covered up, keep it a secret. They got away with it, and it wasn't a blunder on the part of they had to put something out because the rancher Mac Brazel had already talked to the press. They just couldn't deny it. So it's the classic, the building of the straw man and tearing it down. They first admit it, and then, upon examination, we learn that this is all it is. And it worked.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I said to Marcel Jr. I said, well, why wasn't your father reprimanded if he'd made such a mess? He says, because he didn't make him a mess.
Because he did make such a mess.
It's as simple as that, Now, as you mentioned earlier on, we'll carry on about Roswell. It's taken you to some amazing places.
Oh, yes.
And you met some amazing people. You mentioned, you just dropped a name there earlier on, like, I was on opera, just like you do.
We didn't even mention her in the book because the discussion wasn't about Roswell. So.
Well, that's what I was going to come to. I've recently published your book, you and Tom, your partner, Tom Carey, Touched by Roswell, Crash Encounters of the Rich and Famous. I think the title and the subtitle tell it all. But, what struck me is, and it's one of my all-time favorite TV shows, is you have been friends with a gentleman who wrote the foreword for the book, and that's Roy Thinnes.
Yes.
Of course, Invaders fame.
Yes.
And to this day, I still think it's an iconic TV sci-fi show, whichever way you want to look at it. And I remember watching that as a young man. So just give an example, Don, of some of the things, some of the places that are in touch by Roswell, some of the people that have been affected by this case.
You've kind of actually jumped in there a little bit there, Phil, because I was going to say to Don, can you tell me what Bill Clinton, astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Christopher Reeve, John Denver all have in common?
Yes.
which is part of the write-up for the book, but you've jumped in there, mate.
Well, I'd guess and say they're all American.
Yes, good guess, mate. Right, what's the next subject?
Well, John Denver's father was an ace from World War II, and he was stationed at the Roswell Army Airfield 2 years before the incident, and John Denver was born there at the base hospital.
Oh, right.
So we're talking John Denver, singer-composer, the late John Denver was born in Roswell. Now, you mentioned Christopher Reeve, who will, to me, always be Superman.
Yep.
Superman. And we were in the process of finalizing the Roswell script, and I had been working very closely with our executive producer, Paul Davids. And we're talking about the Roswell movie, which starred Kyle MacLachlan, Martin Sheen, Dwight Yoakam, Kim Grice, Bob Gooten, Xander Berkeley, Charles Martin Smith. We had a wonderful cast. And Jeremy Kagan, award-winning director, receives a phone call. And it happens to be from no less than actor / Superman, Christopher Reeve. Chris tells Jeremy that I read their book, which the movie was based on, UFO Crash at Roswell, Kevin's and my first best-selling book. And he asked Jeremy, why haven't you sent me the script? I'd love to, try for the lead. And Jeremy was quick to do that. But at the time, the studio at Showtime, doing the casting, they explained to us they did not consider him in the categorization of lead roles, A, B, C, and so on, that they did not consider him in the A category, which to us was quite shocking. We thought, well, our immediate reaction was, oh my God, Superman wants to be in our movie. And no, the rest is history. Unfortunately, because they cast actor Kyle MacLachlan, who had just come off of Twin Peaks. And I immediately got in contact, and the sad thing was that it was just 6 months later that Christopher Reeve had his devastating fall from his horse and was paralyzed from the neck down. And I contacted the family, and I stayed in regular contact with his late wife, Dana. And the promise was always that when he was well enough, they were residing in upstate New York at that time, that I would bring him a copy of our new book, our second book. And it never happened because he just never recovered to the point that I got to go ahead. And to this day, that very book I have on a coffee table in my office with the Superman emblem over the jacket. And that would have been Christopher Reeve's book. So what could have been?
Yeah, but Kyle MacLachlan, an excellent actor in his own right. And I'll tell you a little story myself about Superman. In the winter of 1978, over into 1979, I worked in West Germany and couldn't speak a word of the language. I mean, not a thing. And I went to the movies.
Yes.
And what was showing was Superman.
There you go.
And I thought, I'll sit here and I'll watch Superman. I thought it would be English language, but have German subtitles. But no, it wasn't. It was dubbed into German. And I tell you now, Don, it's the funniest film I ever saw. Because Superman speaking German, and not only that, you can't understand a word of it. And I thought, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stick it out and figure out what happens in the end, no matter what.
I love it.
Yeah.
Remember, as they promoted the movie, they would state, "You will believe a man can fly."
Yeah. And
it was wonderful.
Yeah.
A special, and again, his acting, and he will always be the Superman.
Absolutely. So how did you meet with Roy Thinners? And I believe since you met, you've remained good friends ever since.
Yes. Well, I was floored by the foreword he wrote. Oh my God! I mean, you talk about. I didn't put a word of that into his mind as far as he just, and that's how he's been. We see each other, and he hugs me. It's just been a tremendous relationship, all beginning with when it was in the early 80s, and I saw a TV column that he was at the time starring in one of the soaps, One Life to Live, which they filmed in New York. And I just took it, happenstance. I sent a letter to, I believe it was ABC in New York, attention Roy Finnis, and it was just a personal letter, and that Dr. Hynek, considered the invaders, a tremendous, as far as initiation into the subject, that many people got involved with the very topic of UFOs because of that TV series, The Invaders. And I wanted to let Roy know that he had influenced many of us into actually becoming true David Vincents, the character he portrayed in the series. And some months passed, and I get this letter. Basically, the next time you are in New York, Don, I'd like you to be my guest to dinner, and I'd love to sit and talk with you, because I'd like to talk to somebody who is actually in the field. And we would meet, and I think I describe in the book how I was the first one who had proposed to Roy, why don't you consider doing a remake? It was, at the time, was just merely 16, 17 years after the series had ended, and why don't you pick up where you left off? And I even brought some videotapes, and it was the craziest thing. I'm sitting in Roy's penthouse on the west side of New York, of Manhattan, and we're watching a couple episodes of The Invaders on video, and I'm sitting right next to David Vincent, Roy Finnis, as we're watching. And he became motivated and enthusiastic about the process. And for the next few years, he attempted to purchase the rights to the original series. And he was close to doing it. I have a copy of the script that I would have consulted on, where ABC was going to tie in a remake of The Invaders, a 3-hour pilot, tying it in with Halley's Comet, and the premise being that the invasion fleet was secretly coming in on the tail of the comet. So just imagine that as the premise, and the creation of a whole new series picking up on the original 60s series. So we were close. But we have remained the best. He would come to my lectures. We have been together so often, whether New York and LA, and I'm in regular contact with him to this day.
That's interesting. What a guy. I've got to admit, I pay a little homage to the Invaders in the theme that I provide for this radio cast. So yeah, if you get a chance to listen to it, Don, after we put it out, which will be about a week and a half away from our recording date, I'll send you the link, and you can listen to that little homage if you want to.
Absolutely, and in fact, if you would desire, I could. Roy is 83 now, and he has not been in the best of health. But if I make, whenever I have made a recommendation, if you could foresee, I could set up an interview. You could possibly do something with the very actor Roy Finnis.
Well, that'd be fantastic if that could be arranged. Absolutely. But just sticking with the book there for a second, please, Don. Elvis Presley has a link to Roswell as well, doesn't he?
Yes. We didn't believe it for years, and it was specifically Tom Carey and I, whenever we would be out at the old base. And they always treated us like we were part of the original guard, as though we had originally served there. And they would take us up into the tower, and they would present us with caps and shirts as far as commemorating, as far as the organization of national, as far as radar tower opera, that type of thing. And so we were from one end of the base to the other. And we always asked, what was that? It was a red plane, a red twin engine that sat on the far west end of the tarmac, and it just sat there for years. And it was the base manager, or I should say the municipal airport manager. His name is Spencer Hill. And he happens to be married to Beth, who just happens to be the last surviving daughter of Walter Hott, who was the public information officer at Roswell in 1947. Well, anyway, I finally asked him one day, I said, Spencer, what's that plane out there? And he laughed and he went, oh, that's been out there for years. and we're waiting for a collector who happened to purchase it, but he's yet to pick it up because obviously the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico are wonderful storage places for old aircraft because of the arid temperature. Nothing rusts or deteriorates there. And I asked, oh, that's interesting. And then he goes, Don, you'll never guess who used to own that plane. I had no idea. And he says, Elvis. You're kidding. He goes, no. In fact, if you want to go out, you can go check it out. And so we took a long drive. We went out, crawled up onto the wing, and we peered in through the cabin. And sure enough, it was just upholstered in the most gaudy red velvet. I mean, the dash, the side panels, and it was clearly, as far as modified for someone. And then it was TCP. There was an emblem of TCP on the dash, and that was Elvis's taking care of business. So we were convinced, and then later the collector finally picked it up, and as it turns out, yes, indeed, it was one of Elvis's own fleet that happened to be stored at Roswell at the very airfield all those years.
Absolutely fantastic. That quite surprised me when I saw that in the book, to be honest. But then again, I suppose you have to keep his aircraft somewhere.
Well, you would be surprised, and Philip, if you ever get back to Roswell, and we certainly hope you will, and hopefully I can arrange something on that order at some of the future festivals. But just the squadrons, the fleets of just retired aircraft, just covering as far as the whole former base, whether the old Northwest Airlines or TWA, even foreign aircraft. And what they often do is there are companies there like Kafu Aerospace and Stewart Industries where they refurbish these aircraft and then they sell them privately. In fact, actor John Travolta just purchased his latest 747 at the facility in Roswell.
Excellent. I know. I know you was a founder of the famous International UFO Museum at Research Centre over there at Roswell. Are you still involved with that, Don?
Oh yes. In fact, we pretty much have updated all of the displays over the last 2 years. We've made them much more interactive, and I go back in 2 weeks. What we're creating now is a wall of witnesses where we're going to have 200 witnesses, their faces and their brief testimony, all demonstrating whether military, whether media, whether civilian, all the ranchers, they're hired, everyone and anyone who's involved back in 1947, that they're all reading from the same script. They're all essentially talking about the same event. And the gift shop, we've drawn over 4 million people from all over the world. And we're coming off of a March, April, May, June, and July now that have been record-setting. So even in the face of COVID, that the museum is doing better than ever. Excellent.
Now, of course, you will be aware of the recent Pentagon release and the COVID-19 relief bill report, etc., etc. A lot of people were expecting the report to even go back as far as 1947 and Roswell.
Yes.
Was you disappointed that it wasn't even mentioned, or did you expect it not to be mentioned?
We had no expectation of anything as far as breakthrough or anything as far as any form of disclosure. I think at the most we suggested there might be disclosure with a small d, that type of thing. And Philip, you felt the same way, that this was going to be all blown out of proportion and become, much to do about nothing. Because in their limited focus from 2004 to the present, it provides them with a high-tech contemporary out, that they can still either point their fingers at the Russians, the Chinese, or even as the Navy since has acknowledged that they have been experimenting in the Pacific with plasma technology, plasma that takes on the shape of glowing orbs and will zigzag and maneuver and do things, even go into the water as described. And I predict that they will also eventually tie this into Space Force, sending a firm message to both Russia and China, for example. The point being that if they acknowledge that it's the reason they're concerned today is that it's a threat. Well, it wasn't a threat back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, up to the turn of the century. So by disavowing, by denying any previous history of the phenomenon, they essentially again deny that there is any possibility that we're dealing with something off the planet. Soviet Union back in 1947 was half destroyed by Nazi Germany. Certainly wasn't any of their technology. China was a third world country until the turn of the century, that type of thing. So what else could it have been back in the 40s and 50s? But again, by limiting the scope, limiting the focus, it demonstrates what their agenda is. And you notice, at least here in the States, it's become an old story, that the media has not touched on it whatsoever in practically last month. And it was also part of the plan, that they can every so often release a little crumb, wave a little carrot, we're working on it, but it's, again, status quo. I saw this with Heining numerous times, that they would dangle this carrot and then quickly reel it back. Nothing new. I'm surprised how many of our colleagues, bought this, thought that this was going to be the breakthrough that we've all lived for. No, not in our lifetimes. I hate to be the harbinger of such news, but again, they have too much to lose. They have been covering this up for almost 75 years, and they're not going to just roll over and do it because they think we deserve to know the truth. It has nothing to do with us. No.
Sorry, Don. I agree with what you're saying, actually, but I also think as well that they will let so many crumbs out into the public domain so they can actually fund their own investigation, shall we call it, or development of this technology that they're using to bamboozle Navy pilots, basically.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because it comes down to this, gentlemen. Unless Congress and a handful of politicians in Washington but unless they call for hearings, unless they finally grant immunity to whistleblowers, pilots, SAC officers, commercial pilots, anyone whose reputation would be at risk, anyone who is honoring a non-disclosure oath of secrecy, to step forward and to be able to testify. And Congress would be amazed, because the three of us have, heard all of this behind the scenes. But for the politicians to realize, my God, this has been going on now for over 70 years. And what do we actually know about it? Unless that happens, we haven't gained 1 foot on the playing field. Not an inch.
Yeah. The thing that struck me more than anything is when they released the report only a few months ago now, they did in so many words admit that yes, there is something behind these UAPs. Well, yeah, we know that, but where it's coming from is the argument, of course. But yet they kind of admitted by releasing this new document that they have lied since 1947, that there is something going on behind these unexplains.
Well, we know that they've been deceiving us since 1947. They only acknowledge that they have been withholding a final conclusion since 2004. They don't even acknowledge that there was a phenomenon before 2004.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, Don and Phil, that we only got, was it 9 pages out of the 17-page report?
That's correct. And the Congress is still waiting for their classified report that they were promised.
But if I remember correctly, in the COVID report that was recently released in July, They did say didn't they give them 30 more days to come up with a scheme or an idea on how to investigate the actual sighting reports.
That is correct. And here we are now. It's going on, it's over 2 months, and they are still waiting. And I'm surprised that elements, as far as especially like Senator Marco Rubio, who is the co-chair of the Intel subcommittee, that they haven't been more demanding of essentially what the deadline, the fact that they were the ones who originally called for the Pentagon to provide the report. And why the stalling, the delaying of something, again, that as we all know, they've been working on for over 70 years, and now they need time? No, they need time to come up with an alternative solution, and that's why they're still stalling. But that was always the case even with Roswell. The fact that the government here in the States is presently up to 4 official explanations. I joke that, husbands, try that with your wives. But the government does it, and it's like, well, what do we expect? But it's always a stall tactic. It's buying time. So you hope that the press either gives up, goes away, forgets about it, or crucial witnesses pass on, or they get cold feet, or they get that phone call warning them to back off. But unless, again, Congress, and it would be a first, it's always been talked about, but it's never been done. If Congress were to finally say, we are going to grant these people immunity, and we're going to call special hearings and allow them to testify on their own personal UFO encounters. Again, it was a lot of nothing that we once again had predicted.
Yeah. We have to give some credibility, I think, to the US Navy in the fact, I can't remember if it was April 2018 or April 2019, that they did change the reporting procedure for pilots or personnel who actually witnessed UAPs or UFOs or flying saucers, if we want to go back to the old days and call them that. So we have to give them some credit for that. And I suppose a little bit of credit must go to people like Tom DeLonge for kind of and Lou Elizondo for bringing some of this out into the public domain. But we now know, of course, that Lou Elizondo has left to the Stars Academy, so there must be some kind of arguments or some disagreements going on there.
Well, and again, that's another show, or that has nothing that I'm really concerned about. I've had discussions with Lou Elizondo on 2 occasions, and the moment I bring up Roswell, he doesn't want to go there. He immediately brings up that he still is on security oath. I know that. I've been advising people to that since he's gone public, that he's still kept on a short leash. He's only going to discuss what they tell him he is able to discuss. Yeah. And one of the off-limits topics just still happens to be Roswell. But one of the things that I had hoped, or at least when asked the question, I wanted to believe that maybe this was finally the Navy stepping forward and saying, we're tired of the Air Force speaking on our behalf regarding this subject.
Yeah.
That we have pilots, we have ship's people, crewmen, captains that experience these aircraft, these unknowns on a regular basis, and we have always been under this umbrella created by the Air Force that all UFO, UAP incidents are immediately referred to the Air Force. Well, I always point out, and Kevin Randall was the first one who actually did, for having acquired the microfilm of the declassified Blue Book files in 1977. And when you go through the 13,000 cases, you observe that there's only a handful of Navy, only even a less amount of Army, and practically no Marine Corps. And the Marines, for example, rely on Navy pilots the best for their own as far as exercises. But nonetheless, it's 99% Air Force. You mean the Navy didn't have their own projects? The Navy has much more coverage of the globe than the Air Force does. They're only within sovereign, within restricted airspace, whereas the Navy, it's global. And we all know, the three of us know of some tremendous, profound Navy cases, even other, as far as country naval situations. So that's what I want to personally target in the future. That we go after the Navy. We go after naval intelligence.
Most interesting. Now, I want to go back to Touched by Roswell. What's your favourite story in the book, Don?
Not that it was, but I think audiences, when I have actually told the story, they seem to like it. And for 2 years, I had just a wonderful experience of being off and on the road with actor William Shatner.
Oh, well, say no more. That's it. I've just fainted. William Shatner, as far as I'm concerned, is the best Captain Kirk ever. Full stop. Period.
Absolutely.
Nobody else gets in. That's it.
And, where the two of us, we would do like these one-day, two-man, as far as sci-fi conventions, conferences, from one end of the country to the other. I did over a dozen with him in the course of 2 years. And it was the very first one. We had just finished doing the Coliseum in Lubbock, Texas. We grabbed a plane, and with our producer, Rick Starnes, the three of us, we rushed through the airport in Dallas, and Shatner, he's got this huge leather garment bag on his shoulder, looked like a horse's saddle. And he's wearing these little granny sunglasses, but everyone's doing a double take, because not only are we rushing through the airport to get to our gate, but everybody's doing the double take, and Captain Kirk, Captain Kirk, you can read their lips, Captain Kirk, So we arrive, we make our flight, and we're speaking that evening at the San Antonio Theater. And I'm in the limo, in the back seat with Captain Kirk, with Bill Shatner. You talk about a dream come true, so to speak. And we're approaching the theater, and the people are lined up on both sides of the street. And Bill, he taps me on the shoulder, and it's like, Don, look at that. We got a sellout. And I look out my window to the left, and there on the marquee of the Alamo Dome, tonight only, the Rolling Stones. And Bill, and I point, and he looks out, and oh no, we're doomed. Well, he wouldn't come out of the green room at the theater, thinking that we're going to be a wasted evening. Well, the producer, Rick Starn, burst through the door. We got a sellout. And Bill beams. He stands up and he goes, I knew it. I never had any doubt, that type of thing. So I'm up on stage, and I'm doing my hour on Roswell. And this was just as our Roswell movie was about to premiere. So I had a trailer, and I was able to show that. And so it was an exciting time. And out of the corner of my eye, sitting at the end of the first row, just, looking up at me, so confident and so, as far as happy, but Bill Shatner, Captain Kirk, big smile on his face, and I was quite honored. Well, later, as we finish, we're backstage, stagehand comes running, and Mr. Shatner, where were you? We were trying to find you. Well, I was out in the front row. I was listening to Don. Well, you'll never guess who was backstage wanting to meet you. Well, who? The mayor? Well, no. Mick Jagger. They were trying to, I was on stage, and they're trying to find Bill Shatner, who's sitting out in the audience, end of the first row, listening to me. The curtain directly behind me, Mick Jagger is pacing back and forth as they're trying to find, Bill Shatner. So I'm the only ufologist in the world who can say that I was sandwiched between Bill Shatner and Mick Jagger while I was giving a presentation on Roswell.
Oh, brilliant. That's brilliant. I'm very jealous. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, well,
I mean, in the book, Don, Touched by Roswell, I mean, there's lots of stories, but there's one that has a link to the UK as well, and that features Huey Green.
yes.
Could you tell us about that for those that don't know who Huey Green was?
Well, that was a chapter or a section that Tom wrote. So we just talked about that the other day, and the fact that neither one of us knew that Huey Green was a famous British actor, and he had just finished filming a film. Tom would know the name of the movie. Maybe you could help me, Philip. In Hollywood, and back then, because flying was such a premium that you literally drove cross country, and he was heading back to, I believe, Philadelphia. So he took the long way, and he was coming through New Mexico. He just finished his film, and there, one of the ABC radio broadcasts talked about the crash of the flying saucer. And the fact that he made note of that, and by the time he returned home into Philadelphia, it was a dead story. He couldn't get any additional news on it, and so it always puzzled him. And when he was interviewed many years later, that he heard it, that it was just a matter of fact that we actually have captured a flying saucer, and then how quickly it just died. How could a story that big just disappear? But that Huey Green, I mean, much as you described, Phil, the fact that he was a famous British actor. And,
I mean, I think the movie you're referring to is called If Winter Comes.
That is correct.
And prior to that, he was actually a flight lieutenant and later became a major in the Royal Canadian Air Force.
In Canada, that's correct.
Yeah. For those that in the current generation, Huey went on after his acting career. I don't know if you're aware of this, Don, to be a famous TV presenter here in the UK. And amongst the many things he did was a show called Opportunity Knocks, which was the X Factor or American Idol of its day, and it launched the careers of many entertainment personnel, pop groups, you name it. So that's what he's probably best known for here in the UK, is Opportunity Knocks. Hugely successful, Don.
And obviously, as you described, that he then influenced and provided many a celebrity, many an entertainer in England as far as with such opportunities. So that's I'm happy to hear that.
Well, absolutely. And what we did many years after the event, of course, this was always a rumor floating around about Huey Green. He'd sort of fallen by the wayside, as many TV presenters do. But when I was part of Bufora, we had a gentleman called Nabil Shaban, who was an actor, and Nabil still is an actor. So we got Nabil on our behalf to contact him. I don't know whether he went through the Actors Union Equity or whatever,
Right.
But it was another showbiz chap contacting him, not a UFO research group. And basically, Nabil just asked him if the story which you've just related was true, and he confirmed it for us. And it's a fascinating little link to here in the UK. Another one of my favourite stories in Touched by Roswell is Jackie Gleason.
Oh yes.
Because he's in one of my favourite films, as Sherrod, Buford T. Justice.
Oh yes.
Smokey I could watch Smokey and the Bandit every day. I really could. And but of course, he was a world famous actor and comedian, not just in the States. Tell us about his connection with Roswell.
Well, it wasn't directly with Roswell as much as I think most within the UFO community know of the story that Nixon and Jackie Gleason, President Richard Nixon, were close personal friends. In fact, they were golf buddies. They would often, be on the golf course together. And Gleason, who happened to at the time live just outside of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and he had an afternoon's day of golf, and he was at a guest house someplace at the country club, and who should be at his door that very evening but without any as far as Secret Service or any aides or anyone else, but the very president, as though, let's go for a drive. And for anyone who might think that, well, it's not common that a president would ever, get behind a steering wheel of his own vehicle, I would challenge you to go look that even President Harry Truman acquired a speeding ticket on one occasion as he was racing to a meeting in Washington while he was president. So whenever they could slip away, they did. And in fact, as I think we all know, that President Bill Clinton did that on many occasions, much too hot as far as our chagrin. But nonetheless, it does happen. So anyway, the story was that Gleason's wife wrote about this in an unpublished manuscript, that Gleason was taken to an underground facility, and he was shown not only wreckage, but he was also shown cadavers. He was shown cryogenically preserved bodies from an alleged crash. There was no mention of where, or what this was connected to. There was no mention of Roswell, New Mexico, or anywhere else. Just that I felt that as a friend, I would take you in to the loop. I would show you this. Gleason's wife would describe that when he returned home, he was beside himself. He didn't eat for days. He wouldn't talk about it. But this is the rest of the story that most aren't aware of, is that Gleason would become an associate of the Center for UFO Studies in Chicago. He
That's fascinating.
then would collect 700 books on the subject. In fact, when he died, that went to the University of Florida in Miami, as I recall. And I may be incorrect, but I know it went to a university there. His home, he built another home in Florida that was shaped like a flying saucer. So influenced was he by this whole situation. And when he was dying, while he was at a hospital in Fort Lauderdale, two things happened. One was our chief investigator at that time, Alan Hendry. I was told at the office in Chicago that our monthly publication at that time was called the International UFO Reporter, and that Hendry took to Gleason his very copy at the hospital that one last time before he died. The other thing was, I was with ABC broadcaster Paul Harvey in Chicago, and when I learned that Paul Harvey and Jackie Gleason also played many a round of golf together, I strongly urged Harvey to contact the hospital and try to get one final statement from Gleason regarding this story. Harvey made such efforts, he was never able to get through, and Gleason died within a week thereafter. So he lost the story. But nonetheless, it is generally accepted within the UFO field because we have it from different quarters, and from no less than Gleason's own wife, one of his own wives. And she, as long as, I understand she still may be with us. I haven't heard that she's passed on, but that she has never recanted that story.
That's fascinating. Now, you mentioned cadavers there, I think, Don. I have a question from a listener to the show, and he did ask this when he found out I was interviewing you. So there's actually three parts to the question, but it's all related. So he wanted to know, do you personally believe that alien bodies were actually recovered? And if so, where did they go? And what was done with them? And do you believe anywhere alive?
Okay, and I can answer all three in one general response. We've had both first-hand military as well as civilian who have not only described the bodies recovered, the little people, the little men. Much to the credit of the witnesses, they never called them ETs or spacemen or aliens. It was always, that they were humanoid. They looked similar to us, but again, we know the descriptions. Larger disproportionate head, larger eyes, diminutive nose, thin slit mouths, and, devoid of any earlobe, that type of thing. Silver gray, one-piece coverall. But as one of the personnel at Roswell, when we were doing CBS 48 Hours, and Phil Jones, the reporter, asked, well, how do you know they weren't from here? To which he responded, they sure weren't from Texas. So they knew exactly what they were dealing with at that time, and to this day they never backed off thinking, well, it could have been children or it could have been an experiment. No, they weren't from here. Then we had a growing list of witnesses to a survivor, and in fact, when we talked to the sons of he was a triple ace from World War II, Colonel Marion Magruder. He was called Black Mac, and he was part of the War College class of 47, 48. And when we documented that they were assigned to Wright-Patterson in April of 48, so not quite a year later, but according to Magruder, he told his sons, independent of one another, that the War College was assigned to Wright-Pat. They were presented with the wreckage from Roswell. They were told specifically it was from Roswell, and then they were taken into another area and they were shown the survivor. So Magruder was quite frank about describing that it was the survivor from Roswell, the lone living, recovery from the crash. Well, throughout the years and then all the testimony we've also accumulated from those on the receiving end, after everything was shipped, everything was transported out of New Mexico, the focal point, the destination, generally described was Wright Field, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Not only did you have all the underground vaults, underground lab facilities, multi-levels, from the surface, but you had Foreign Technology Division, where they did all the reverse engineering, captured German and Japanese, and then later Russian technology. So it made perfect sense that if you had something truly foreign, it would still go to FTD in Dayton, Ohio. Question is, where today? And we've had not only a first-hand full-bird colonel who described that the bodies were there today, but we also had Colonel George Weinbrenner, who made the very comment to Robert Emenegger, the film producer, the author who did the book UFOs, Past, Present, and Future. And even the late Colonel Robert Friend, the second last director of Project Blue Book, when I had dinner with him on one occasion in Los Angeles, and I asked him quite frankly, where would the bodies be today? And if indeed there were bodies. And all three of these sources said specifically, Dugway, the military facility in Dugway, Utah, which turns out to be the biological medical research facility. So in other words, it's one thing if you have wreckage and all the assumption that the reverse engineering would be ongoing at Groom Lake, Area 51, presently, but as far as the preservation of unique specimens, it would be this facility in Utah, Dugway, the Biological Medical Research Facility. And we intend to focus on that in the near future.
That's great, Don. Thank you. I mean, that was a question from one of our listeners, Michael Beavers, and I think he got the full explanation there. Don, thank you very much. which sadly brings us to the end of the show.
Went quickly, yes.
Well, it has indeed, and that's always a good indication.
Yes.
We could go on literally all night, but time is against us. I just want to mention, Touched by Roswell, Crash Encounters of the Rich and Famous. It's got all these stories in and more. It's not a research book. It's Don and Tom's adventures, I should say, with Roswell. I think that would be a great way to look at it. By Don Schmitt, Tom Carey. That's on sale now on Amazon in a number of different formats. We'd like to thank you for your time this evening, Don. It is, as always, a pleasure to speak to you.
Yeah, can I just back up there, please, Phil, what you've just said there. Absolutely brilliant, Don. We really, really want to thank you for your time. We got there eventually, after some little gremlins, but we're okay.
That we finally did, yes. My regrets, it's taken this long, but all the more reason we should do it again, make it a regular thing, because we can easily fill as much time as we have available. We're all getting older. And above everything else, we all have to come together and come up with some answers while we still have time. If not for us, for our children and our grandchildren.
Absolutely.
So, I enjoyed it thoroughly. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Over to you, Phil.
Well, no, the thanks is all ours, Don. Like I said, once again, Touched by Roswell. So it's available on Amazon in a whole variety of formats. We wish you well, you and Tom, with your research, Don. And we hope to catch up again soon.
I look forward to it. Thank you both. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Good night. God bless.
Good night.
God bless both of you. Thank you.
Outer Limits Magazine presents A Fourth Encounter. A Fourth Encounter. On the 7th and 8th of May, 2022. Featuring the following speakers: Peter Robbins, Malcolm Robinson, Paul Sinclair, Jennifer Stein, Philip Kinsella, Ronald Kinsella, Paul Askoff, Mike Koffel, Sasha Christie, Steve Midgley, Colin Saunders, and your host from Outer Limits Magazine, Chris Evers. Featuring previously advertised speakers. Please note, we shall endeavor to include all advertised speakers at this event. But, if government guidelines prohibit their travel and attendance, we shall run the event with a full list of only UK-based speakers. Also note that you may be required to prove your vaccination status to enter the building and attend. We will follow government guidelines. Therefore, it is recommended to check the OLM website on a regular basis, where tickets can also be purchased. We look forward to seeing you at our A Fourth Encounter event.